Rabbi, let's get going. We're on DAF Yud Dalid Amid Aleph, and we're talking about the methods for a Yavama to acquire her liberation. The Mishnah had said that she acquires her liberation either through Chalitza or through Misas Hayavam, through the death of the Yavam. Today is mostly an exercise in hermeneutics, so we'll get through it as quickly as we can. Minolan, how do we know this? Dichsi v'nikra shmo b'Yisrael beis chalutz hanoal. So the way we know that the only way that she can be liberated is through chalitza is because it says in the pasuk, and we know that chalitza completely liberates her to be able to marry someone else, because it says that the name of the Yavam shall be called the house of the removed shoe. So kevin shecholatz banal hutra l'chol Yisrael. Why does it have to say the word Bi Yisrael, in Israel? Because once her name is called, once she has gone through this process, she is now available to be called out through Israel, that she's available for remarriage. And that's the way we know from the word Yisrael that she's now available to all of Israel. So the Gemara says, Hi Yisrael, lahachi Yehuda asa hami boile, lechidatani Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. But wait a minute, we use this word Yisrael for another purpose, as Rav Shmuel had brought a brisa to teach, Bi Yisrael, beveistin shel Yisrael, v'lo beveistin shel ovdei kochavim. That the word Yisrael teaches me the nature of who presides over the chalitza beistin. That it has to be a beistin of natural-born Jews, not a beistin of Gentiles, or, according to some girsas, it's a beistin of Gerim. There are certain times when a ger may act as a dayan, but in many halachic situations, a ger may not act as a dayan. This is one of those situations. So the question that the Gemara is asking is, if you already are using this word Yisrael to teach me about the constitution of the Beis Din, how can you use it to teach me about her permissibility to remarry anyone in Yisrael? The Gemara answers, Trei b'Yisrael ksivi. There are two times the word b'Yisrael are written in the Parsha of Yibum. One over here, and one when the Yavama comes to Beis Din and she says, my Yavam refuses to establish a name for his brother b'Yisrael in Israel. So that's what the second Yisrael is coming for. So the Gemara says, V'akatimi boile l'chedatanya. But we need the second word b'Yisrael for another reason. As the Brisa says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Pamechas hayinu yoshvim lifnei Rabbi Tarfon, Uboas hayavam lachlotz, v'amar lanu, anu kulchem v'imru chalutz hanoal, chalutz hanoal. That we were once sitting with Rabbi Tarfon, and there was a chalitza case that he had to preside over. And he told all of us who were sitting around witnessing the chalitza case, he said, it is incumbent upon all of you who are sitting here to say verbally, chalutz hanoal, that she has had her shoe removed, or she has removed the shoe, she has removed the shoe. Meaning that there's a verbal requirement of all the witnesses at the event of the chalitza. And how do we know that? From it says, V'nikra shemo b'Yisrael, that his name shall be called in Yisrael. So you see that the word Yisrael is coming to teach that. How can you now use it to teach me about her permissibility to all of Yisrael? The Gemara answers, Hahume v'nikra shemo nafka. No, the need for everyone present to call out Beis Chalutz Hanoal is not derived from the word Yisrael. It's derived from the words V'nikra Shemo. His name shall be called out, and the name of the Yavam shall be called out, Beis Chalutz Hanoal. And therefore the word Bi Yisrael truly is available for us to make this drasha that she is available to remarry among all of Yisrael. Let us go on. Uvemisas Hayavam. And next, the last thing the Mishnah said is that the way that a chalutza is liberated is either, a Yavama is liberated is either through chalitza, or if the Yavam dies before he has a chance to do Yibum or chalitza, that would now make her available to remarry. So Minolan, how do you know that? So kal v'chomer, uma eshes ish shehi bechenek misas abal matirasa, Yavama shehi balav lo kol shekain. So the Gemara says, I'll make a kal v'chomer. He says, look, a married woman, when she's married, if you have intimacy with her, you get the death penalty. And yet her husband's death can remove that stringent prohibition. So surely the death of the Yavam can remove a relatively minor prohibition of a Yavam l'shuk. which is only a mitzvahs lo saseh. It's only a negative commandment, but there's no death penalty associated with it. But the Gemara says that's not a good kal v'chomer, because mala isha si shekain yotza beget, tomer bezu sheina yotza beget. But I can show you that there's a certain leniency by a married woman that doesn't exist by a yavama. A married woman can have her marriage alleviated through a get, and maybe that's the reason why her husband's death can also alleviate her prohibition. But a yavama, her status cannot be alleviated by a get, maybe therefore the yavam's death can also not alleviate her status. The Gemara says, Hanami yotza b'chalitza. The Gemara says that's not a valid question, because just like there's a mechanism of get for a married woman, there's a mechanism of chalitza for a yavama. So we put them on the same par, and therefore they have the same strength, and therefore you can still make the kal v'chomer, that if death works to free her by a married woman, it should surely free her by a yavama. So elamala eishes ishikein osra matira. But here's the real pircha, here's the real challenge to the kal v'chomer. The reason perhaps why a married woman can be liberated through her husband's death is because the person who died was the one who put her into that position of prohibition in the first place. But over here, the yavam is her brother-in-law. His death, fine, but he didn't put her into that position of being prohibited. It was her dead husband who put her in the position of being prohibited. So to that, Amar Ravashi, Hanami Osra Matira, Yavam Osra, Yavam Sharila. So Ravashi says, but you just have to look at it differently. Because in reality, when her husband dies, why is there now Zika for her to do Yibum? It is because of her brother-in-law. In other words, if she didn't have a brother-in-law, she would be no mitzvah of Yibum, and there would be no question. She could go ahead and remarry. The only reason why she's now prohibited to remarry anyone is because she has a mitzvah of Yibum because of her brother-in-law.
It's her mother-in-law, really.
It's her...
Well, it's the mother-in-law's for the child.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, okay, always
goes back to the children.
Always goes back, yeah, to the mother. Anyway, but the point is that Ravashi says the way you look at it is that in here too, the person who has prohibited her through his existence is also liberating her through his death. And so therefore it is a valid kal v'chomer. But now let's look at it from the other direction. We say, hey, eishes ish yotze b'chalitza mikal v'chomer. Uma yavama she'ena yotze b'get yotze b'chalitza, zu sheyotze b'get, eno din sheyotze b'chalitza. The argument would be, why don't we now say that a regular married woman could always exit a marriage not only through get, but also through chalitza? And our kal v'chomer is as follows. If chalitza works even in a place where a get doesn't work, then surely in a place where a get does work, chalitza should also work. So why don't we say that? So the Gemara says, Omar Kra, Sefer Krisus. Sefer Korsa ve'in davar acher Korsa. Because the Torah talks about the get as a scroll of severance that is the only way to sever the marriage when the husband is still alive. So you see from that pasuk that that's the only method, and there is no other method available to her to liberate her from her marriage. Usehei Yavama Yotze Beget. So go to the other direction. Mikal v'chomer. Then why don't we argue that a Yavama should be able to be liberated not only through chalitza but also through a get? Uma ishesi shein yotze b'chalitza yotze beget, zu she yotze b'chalitza eno din she yotze beget. Because if a get works in a situation where chalitza doesn't work by a married woman, then surely in a scenario where chalitza does work, surely get should work. So the Gemara says, Omar Kra Kacha. So the answer is because the Torah says that she shall say, after doing the process of chalitza, Kacha ye'aseh la'ish asher lo yivneh es beis achiv. So shall be done to the man who refuses to build his brother's house. And so what do you see from the word kacha? Kacha means it's got to dafka be according to this protocol. Kacha, it's got to be this way. So because it's got to be dafka this way, this teaches me that there is no other mechanism for her to be liberated other than chalitza, and that's why a get doesn't work. So the Gemara now says, and the Gemara, as the Gemara says, v'kacha yikuva. The word kacha says is saying it's got to dafka be this way. So now the Gemara's question is a very interesting question, which is that you mean to tell me v'chol heicha diika yikuva lo darshi kal v'chomer? You mean to tell me that anytime you find a clause in a pasuk which says do it this way, you mean to tell me that a kal v'chomer cannot provide an alternate method, an alternate protocol? Let me show you where that's not the case. V'hayom ha'kipurim dichsiv gorel v'chuka. There is by the laws of Yom Kippur, as we are all familiar with, there are 2 goats, and the Kohen Gadol has to take a lottery. And the lots will tell him which goat is for the korban, for a korban chatas, and which one is for Azazel, which one gets sent out to the wilderness. And what's interesting is that the Torah says that it's a chukah, it's a statute that's got to be done this way, which is very much like the word kacha. It's got to dafka be done according to this protocol. And yet, the Tanya, look at the Brisa. V'asahu chatas, hagorol osechatas, ve'ein Hashem osechatas. We have to have a special additional word of v'asahu. He shall do it as a chatas. Meaning, not who is he? The gorel. The lottery creates this animal as a chatas, and from that extra word v'asahu chatas, that teaches us that the only way that the animal goat can become a chatas is through the lottery. And therefore, if the Kohen Gadol were to decide to dispense with the lottery and instead just say, you know what, that'll be the chatas and that'll be for Azazel, it doesn't work. The designation does not stick. Sheyachol, because you could have argued, v'halo dinhu, you make a kal v'chomer. Uma b'makom shelo kiddush hagorol kiddush Hashem, makom shekiddush hagorol enu din sheyikadesh Hashem. You could have argued, look, in regular cases of karbanos, doing a lottery to determine when an animal is sanctified does not work. You have to have a verbal designation. And therefore, in a case where verbal designation works, a lottery does not work, surely where a lottery works, certainly verbal designation should work. And therefore, you could have argued, made that kal v'chomer, and therefore, tamulomer v'asahu chatas. That's why you need that extra phrase. No, it's the gorel, hagorel osechatas, ve'ein Hashem osechatas. That's the conclusion of the Brisa, that only the gorel can make this animal into a sin offering, but not a verbal designation. So the Gemara now reflects on this Brisa, and it says, "V'taima demiyat tekra halav hachidarshinan kal v'chomer afal gav dichsiv bechuka." So you see that just because the Torah had said the word chuka, which tells me there's a specific protocol that you have to follow, that does not mean that a kal v'chomer would not have worked. A kal v'chomer would have worked to allow a verbal designation were it not for the extra phrase of the asahu chatas. So therefore, the Gemara's question is, just because it says by chalitza, kacha, this is how it's supposed to be done, that doesn't stop a kal v'chomer from offering an additional protocol for the process. So we're back to our original question. Why doesn't a get work for a yavama to give her her freedom? The Gemara answers, Amar kra la v'lo la yavama. Answers the Gemara, look at the extra word that's written by Gittin, v'chasav la sefer krisus. You write for her a scroll of severance, and that teaches me that a get only works for a regular married woman, but it does not work for Yavama. So that's the Gzeres HaKasav. Ve'ema la lishma. The Gemara says, but maybe the word la is like we learned in Maseches Gittin, that you have to write it lishma. You have to write the get specifically with this woman in mind. And that's what the word la is coming to. She can't use it for something else. The Gemara answers, trei la ksivi. There are 2 times the word la is written in the course of divorce. It says for the first time when she's married to her first husband, v'chasav la sefer krisus, he shall write her a book of severance. And then afterwards the psukim say that if she gets married to a second husband, and that husband also doesn't like her, v'chasav la sefer krisus, he shall write la for her a book of severance. So that second word la teaches me that it only works for a married woman, does not work for a yavama. But the Gemara says that second law was also spoken for in Maseches Gittin. The second law teaches me that you can only write 1 get per 1 woman. What if a guy's married to 2 women and he's really had enough and he wants to just get out of both marriages? So how do you know that you can only write 1 get for 1 woman? You can't write 1 get for 2 wives. Because it says law in the singular. Only for 1 wife can you write a get, not for 2 wives. So Ella Amar Kra, so the Gemara says, you're right. I can't derive it from extra verbiage by Gittin because that's already spoken for. But rather, let's go back to the pasuk by Chalitza. It says, Na'al in midi achrina lo. There's an extra word Na'al that's written in the pasuk. It could have just said Bayis hachalutz, the house of the removed, and it would be implicit that we're talking about the removed shoe, because that's the whole subject of the pasuk. The reason why the Torah writes the word na'al in extraneous time is to teach me that only through the removal of the shoe, through chalitza, does this woman have her freedom, not through a get. So v'hai na'al lahachi huda asa hami boy le'lichidatanya. But one second, you need that extra word na'al for something else. Na'alo in na'alo, because the Torah says that she shall remove his shoe. Ainli ela na'alo. Na'al shel kol adam minole. That only teaches this teaches me that she's only allowed to ainli ela na'alo. This only teaches me that the shoe has to belong to him. How do you know that if the shoe belongs to someone else, that it's also going to work? Tamalomar no'al riba. That the Torah tells me that the shoe does not have to belong to the yavam. The shoe could belong to somebody else. Doesn't have to dafka be his shoe. He could borrow the shoe from somebody else and still be yotzei the mitzvah of chalitza. So the Gemara says, Im kain matam alomer na'alo. Why then does the Torah say na'alo, which implies that it has to be his shoe? If there's another pasuk that says na'al, any shoe. The Gemara answers, na'alo haro'ilo, prat lagodol shen yachol lahalech bo, prat lakatan shen chofa esrov godlo, prat lemisulim shein lo akev. The answer is na'alo means that it has to be a shoe that is fitting for the yavam. It can't be too big, because if he tries to walk in, it's going to fall off. It can't be too small that it's going to scrunch up his foot. It can't be a shoe that doesn't have a heel that it's so worn down that he can't use it. That's what the word na'alo teaches me. Even though the shoe does not have to belong to him, but it still has to be a shoe that he could use as a functional shoe. So the word na'alo is already spoken for. How then na'al and na'alo are already spoken for? The word na'al teaches me that the shoe does not have to belong to him. So how can you use it to teach me that only chalitza and not a get? Im kein nichtov kra na'al, my ha na'al, shamasmina tarte. So the Gemara says, because if that was the only thing that the word na'al was coming to teach, that it can belong to someone else, the shoe, then the extra letter hey is extraneous. The extra letter hey says ha na'al the shoe, meaning that only through the shoe can this woman get her freedom. She cannot get her freedom through a get. That concludes our full analysis of the first Mishnah of Maseches Kiddushin. It only took us 14 and a half blot. Not bad. Now we're ready to start the next Mishnah. Mishnah, Eved Ivri Nikna Bekesef Uvishtar Vekona Atzmo B'Shanam Uviyovel Uvigiraon Kesef. Now we're talking about Eved Ivri, which is a Jew who is sold into slavery. Now let's clarify. A Jew can be sold into slavery for one of two reasons. Either because he is poor and he decides to sell himself because he has nothing to live on, and he works for 6 years, and after 6 years he goes free, or he could be sold by Bayt. Bayt could arrest the guy who catches him for stealing or some other kind of incurrence of debt, and he says, I don't have what to pay back with. The Bayt will sell him into slavery in order for him to work off the debt. So the Mishnah tells us that how does a master acquire the slave, this Eved Ivri? Either through the payment of kesef, or through the receipt of a shtar, either through receiving a contract, and v'koina atzmo b'shanam u'v'yovel u'v'giron kesef. And the Eved Ivri acquires his freedom either through going through 6 years of slavery, or if Yovel interrupts the 6 years, that's when he goes free. And the third method is he can pay out prorated amount to gain his freedom. So therefore, if let's say he was sold for $600 and for 6 years, and he's already worked 2 out of those 6 years, he would have to pay $400 in order to buy his freedom. Yeseira alav ama ha'ivri ashakona es atzma b'simonim. Now, the laws of a male slave also apply to a female slave, that a father has the opportunity to sell his minor daughter into slavery in the hopes that maybe the master or the master's son will marry her before this slavery period concludes and make her part of the family. the law is that if the master does not, or his son does not marry the girl, then as soon as she reaches physical maturity at the age of 12, she immediately goes free. So she can go free through all the methods of an Evan Ivri, plus she can go free through physical maturity. Hanirtza nikna biritzia. Now we have another category of Eved Ivri, which is what we call the nirtza, where the Torah says in Parshas Mishpatim that if a guy is a slave, an Eved Ivri, and he says, you know what, I know that my 6-year period is coming up, but I really love it here. I want to continue being your Eved. So the Torah says, Veratza es azno b'martzeya, that the master shall pierce the fellow's ear, and he becomes a slave until the conclusion of a 50 or potentially 50-year period until Yovel. So he is acquired through the piercing of the ear. And how does he acquire his freedom? Either through the arrival of Yovel or through the death of the master. Now it's interesting, only here does the master's death liberate the Eved Ivri. In the previous case of an Eved Ivri where he's working for 6 years, if the master dies, what's the law? He passes down and is enslaved to the heirs of the original master. So the Gemara now says...
It's a debt, that's
why.
What?
What?
It's a debt, that's probably why he passes down.
Well, we'll see. The Gemara is going to learn it out from Psukim. The Gemara is going to learn it out from Psukim. So the Gemara now says, Eved Ivri nikna bekesef minolan. How do we know that an Eved Ivri can be acquired through cash? So Amar Kra mikesef miknaso melamesh nikna bekesef. So the pasuk says, in the context, the Torah talks about if an Eved Ivri gets sold to a Gentile, the Torah says that there is a mitzvah to try and redeem him because you don't want a Jew to be in captivity under the authority of a Gentile, because it's going to deprive him of his opportunity to do mitzvahs. So the Torah says that there's a mitzvah to purchase him back for the purchase price that was used to purchase him with. So you see, therefore, that he was purchased by the Gentile. But the Gemara says that's fine. Ashkechan Eved Ivri hanimkar lo avi kol chavim hol b'chol kinyano bekesef nimkar li Yisrael minolan. That only indicates that if he's sold to a Gentile, kesef works, because after all, that's the only method of kinyan that's available to a Gentile. But how do you know that if an Eved Ivri is sold to a Jew, that kesef works? Maybe there are other methods of kinyan that work and kesef doesn't work. So Amar Kra vehefda. So the Torah says by the Amma Ha'ivriya, the word vehefda. We had this just a couple of days ago. That word vehefda teaches me that the master has a participatory role to play in her liberation. And that taught me that you what? Melamed shemagras pijana viyotza. That teaches me that the master has to prorate her liberation price. So if she's already worked part of the time served, she only has to pay a prorated amount for her liberation. But what does that teach me? That teaches me that kesef is involved. She was given kesef in order to sell herself into slavery, and she has to give kesef for her freedom. So you see that kesef was the method of kinyan. But the Gemara questions that. It says, Ashkechan Amma Ha'ivri Aholu Mikadsha Bekesef, Miknaya Bekesef. But Eved Ivri Minolan. But maybe that only works for a female Jewish slave, because since one of the things available to a master is to marry her, and marriage works with kesef, maybe her slavery works with kesef as well. But an Eved Ivri who's not going to be married, right, with kesef, maybe kesef doesn't work to purchase his slavery. So Amar Kra ki mocher lecha achicha ha'ivri o ha'ivriya va'avadecha sheish shanim. So to that my answer is, this pasuk connects the Eved Ivri to the Amma Ha'ivriya, because it connects the male slave to the female slave. It says, when your Jewish brother or your Jewish sister is sold to you, then they have to work for 6 years. So whatever method of kinyan works for an Amma Ha'ivriya will also work automatically for an Eved Ivri. So if kesef works for her, it works for the Eved Ivri. Makish Ivri li'ivriya. So Gemara says, okay, but wait a minute. Ashkechan mecharuhu beistin. Hol v'nimkar bal karcha mocher atzmo minolan. But maybe the Gemara says, kesef only works in a case where he was sold by beistin. Because as I mentioned, there are two methods for an Eved Ivri to be sold into slavery. Either he sells himself, or Beistin sells him. And maybe only in a case, because that pasuk is clearly talking about ki yimacher lecha. when he shall be sold to you. That pasuk is not talking about where he's selling himself. It's talking about where Beis Din is selling him. And maybe only when Beis Din sells him, they can sell him with kesef because he doesn't have any control over the situation. But how do you know that when he controls the situation, that kesef is also a valid mechanism? The Gemara answers, Yolef Sachir Sachir. We have a Gzeira Shava. There are two psukim in the Torah that talk about an Eved Ivri. One is in the context of where Beis Din sells him, and the other one is in the context where he sells himself. In both psukim, the Torah says you have to treat him kisachir. You have to treat him like a day laborer and treat him fairly as an employee. And so you see that the fact that the Torah connects the two with the word sachir through a Gzeira Shava tells me that whatever method of kinyan that works for when Beis Din sells him will also work when he sells himself. Hanich laman yolav sachir sachir, ela laman lo yolav sachir sachir, ma'ikal meimar. But the Gemara says that only works if you hold of this Gzeira Shava. But if you don't hold of the Gzeira Shava, what are you going to say? That implies that the Gemara already knows that there's an opinion that does not hold of this Gzeira Shava, which we'll see in just a moment. So for that, the Gemara says, I have an answer. Amar Kra v'chis asig, Mosaf al inyan rishon v'yilamid elyon mitachton. The Gemara answers is that there are two parshios in the Torah that are back to back in Parshas Bahar. One pasuk talks about a Jew who sold to another Jew, an Eved Ivri who sold to a Jew. The second paragraph that comes right afterwards teaches about an Eved Ivri who sold to a Gentile. And the first word of that parsha is v'chis asig. It has the letter Vav to add and to say that the two paragraphs are connected. And so from there we see that whatever method of kinyan works for a Gentile purchasing an Eved Ivri will also work for a Jew purchasing an Eved Ivri. So just like we learned before that a Goy can purchase an Eved Ivri through Kesef, from this connection we see that a Yisrael can also purchase an Eved Ivri through Kesef. So now the Gemara says, okay, let's go back to that Gzeira Shava that you just taught me. Uman Tana Delo Yolav Sachir Sachir. Who doesn't learn the Gzeira Shava of Sachir Sachir to connect the Eved Ivri who sold by Beis Din to the Eved Ivri who sells himself? Haitanu, it's the following brisa. At least the Gemara thinks it's the following brisa. Detanya Hamocher Atzmo Nimker L'Sheish V'Yeser Al Sheish. This brisa says, now we're going to see a machlokus in this brisa between the Tanakama and Rebbe Eliezer. And the Tanakama seems to be saying that there are four differences between an Eved Ivri who is sold by Beis Din and an Eved Ivri who sells himself. So difference number one is that when a person sells himself, he can serve for either 6 years or as many years as he wants. He can sell himself for even more than 6 years. He can sell himself for 10 years, for 20 years. Whatever is predetermined between the buyer and the seller is perfectly fine. But if Beis Din sells him, he can only be sold for 6 years. So that's difference number one. Now already, what are we seeing? We're seeing that there is no Gzeira Shava, at least apparently, because if you make a Gzeira Shava between those two kinds of Eved, how can you make this distinction in Halacha? If the Gzeira Shava of Sachir Sachir tells me that they're connected, so then you shouldn't be able to make this distinction. So let's see distinction number two. Hamocher atzmo eno nirtza, mecharuhu Beis Din nirtza. If a person sells himself into slavery, he doesn't have the option of extending his slavery by having his ear pierced. But if a person is sold by Beis Din, that's the only kind of slave that has the recourse of extending his slavery through getting his ear pierced. Third difference, mocher atzmo ein manikin lo, macharu Beis Din manikin lo. If a person, there's a din of ha'anaka in the Torah, that when an Eved Ivri goes free, there's an obligation for the master to provide him with parting gifts. And that's something that we'll discuss later on in the Gemara. It's called ha'anaka. But the law of ha'anaka only applies to when he's sold by Beis Din. It does not apply to when he sells himself. And difference number four is, hamocher atzmo ein rabo moser lo shivcha kenanis, mecharu Beis Din rabo moser lo shivcha kenanis. The Torah says that if an Eved Ivri gets sold into slavery, the master has the option of giving him a Gentile female slave to consort with so that he can produce babies. And those babies will be the monetary possession of the owner. So he's acting as a stud. He's acting as a man who can create babies for the master. But that's a big chiddush, because after all, he's still a Jew. How can he consort with a non-Jewish slave? It's a special allowance because he's made himself into a slave. But according to the Tana Kama, that only works for a Eved Ivri who's sold by BAYT. If an Eved Ivri sells himself into slavery, he cannot consort with this Shivcha Kananis, with a Gentile slave girl. But so those are the four differences. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer Zeh vazeh inonim kar elo l'sheish, Zeh vazeh nirtza, v'zeh vazeh manikim lo, v'zeh vazeh Rabbi Moshe lo Shivcha Kananis. Rabbi Eliezer says in all four cases, I hold that they are exactly the same, both a guy who sells himself and a guy who's sold by BAYT. In both cases, he can only work for 6 years and then he goes free. In both cases, he can have his ear pierced to extend his slavery. In both cases, he's entitled to ha'anaka, to parting gifts, and in both cases, he's entitled to consort with a shivcha to be able to create babies. So my lav b'haka miflagi. So our assumption is that this is the machlokas. The Tana Kama lo yolav sachir sachir, v'Rebbe Eliezer yolav sachir sachir. That the Tana Kama does not hold of the gzeira shav, and Rabbi Eliezer does hold of the gzeira shav. So to that, Omer Rav Tivyumi Mishmei di Abaya, no, the kuli alma yolav sachir sachir, v'hacha b'haikra kamiflagi. No, in reality, the gzeira shav does hold for both the Tana Kama and Rabbi Eliezer. However, there's a machlokes, if you can find additional psukim that do create the distinction in these laws, then despite the kal v'chomer, we will create the distinction. So what's the machlokes? My time of the Tanakama the Omer Mocher Atzma Nimker L'Sheish V'Yeser Al Sheish. Why does the Tanakama hold that an Eved Ivri can work for even more than 6 years, depending upon the original stipulation? Miyet Rachmana Gabi Mecharuhu Beistin Va'avadecha Sheish Shanim Zeh Below Mocher Atzmo. Because by the pasuk which talks about when Beistin sells him, it says Va'avadecha, he shall serve you for 6 years. So the emphasis on the word he shall serve you, implies that only he shall serve you for 6 years, but if a person sells himself, he could potentially serve for longer. V'idach va'avadecha lecha v'lo liyoresh. But the other, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is, no, you're reading that wrong. Va'avadecha, which is an extra word, is to tell you that no, he serves you for 6 years. Implying that only you, but if you die, you the master die, he does not serve your son for 6 years. That's the chiddush, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that he doesn't get passed on as an inheritance. So that's the way he learns the pasuk, and therefore he says it's equal to both an Eved Ivri who sells himself and an Eved Ivri who's sold by BAYT. V'idach avadcha achrina ksiv. And the Tanakama says, but there's an extra word, avadcha. It says avadcha twice. And both, one is to tell me that only he works for 6 years and not the guy who sells himself. And the second time is to tell me that it only works for you for 6 years, but does not work for the Yoresh, does not work for the heir for 6 years. V'ida chahula hartzas adon huda asa. And Rabbi Eliezer will tell you that no, the second time that the Torah says va'avadecha, that says avadcha, that he has worked for you, is to only assuage the master who may have reluctance to free his slave after working him for 6 years. Because the context of that second word, avadcha, is as follows. The Torah says, Lo yiksheve einecha b'shalechacha oso chavshi me'imach. It should not be hard in your eyes when you send away a Hebrew slave after 6 years, because after all, he has worked for you for 6 years. You've gotten your money's worth. Right? And that's what the Torah says. Avadecha sheishanim. He's already worked for you for 6 years, so let him go. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says that word avadcha is not teaching you an additional halacha. It's only there to appease a master who has to free his slave after 6 years, and therefore you can't derive any additional halacha. Okay, that explains the machlokes between the two. Even though they both hold the gzeira shava, the Tanakama holds that an Eved Ivri who sells himself can work longer for 6 years than 6 years. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, he's got to work only 6 years, just like an Eved Ivri who's sold by BAYT. My time at the Tanakama da Omer Mocher Atzmo Eno Nirtza. Okay, now let's go to the second difference. Why does the Torah say, why does the Tanakama hold that an Eved Ivri who sells himself is not subject to getting his ear pierced? Midamiyet Rachmona Gabi Mecharuhu Beistin Veratza Adonaves Ozno Bamartzeya. Ozno Shalo Velo Ozno Shal Mocher Atzmo. Because the Torah says that when he gets sold by BAYT, the master shall pierce his ear. So ozno, his ear, implies only his ear shall be pierced, but not the ear of someone who sells himself into slavery. V'idach hahilik zera shavahu da'asa, and Rabbi Eliezer will say no. The word ozno is not a miyut. It's there for it to make a zera shava. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer minayin l'ritzia shehi ba'oizen yamanis nemar kan oizen v'nemar lahalan oizen ma lahalan yamin af kan yamin. How do you know that which ear of the Eved are you supposed to pierce? So Rabbi Eliezer says we learn it from Gzeira Shava, from Mitzorah, that just like a Mitzorah, his purification process of placing oil and blood is placed on his right ear, so too the piercing of the Eved Ivri's ear is on the right ear. So you don't use the word ozno to preclude, to exclude the Eved who sells himself, but rather you use it to make that Gzeira Shava, to teach you that it's his right ear. V'idach, and what does the Tanakama say to that? In kain lema kra ozen, my ozno. He says, the Tanakama says you learn both of it. The word ozen is completely extraneous. So the word that word ozen, it could have been written as ozen, ear, and you could have made the same Gezeira Shava. Why does it say ozno, his ear, and not the ear of the Eved Ivri who sells himself? V'idach ahumi boile ozno v'lo ozna. And Rabbi Eliezer's response to that is, no, you need the letter Vav of ozno, his ear, to teach me that this law only applies to male slaves, does not apply to female slaves. That's what his and not hers, not his and not a guy who sells himself. V'idach nafkala me v'im yomar ha'eved v'lo ama. The Tanakama says, no, you don't need the ozno for that. You learn it out from the fact that the Torah says the slave shall say. The slave implies, the word eved implies only a male slave, but not a female slave, which is called an amma. So that's how you know that the ear piercing only applies to the male and not the female. V'idach mi boile ad sheyomer kishuhu eved. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, that word ha'eved does not teach you that, because you need that word eved to tell you that he has to request the ear piercing before the 6 years are up, while he's still an eved. But once he stops being an eved after the 6 years are up, the law that he can get his ear pierced no longer applies. That's what the word eved tells you. V'idach may eved ha-eved nafka. And the Tanakama will tell you, I learned both laws. I learned from the word eved that he still has to be within his 6 years of servitude in order to get his ear pierced. And the word ha-eved with the extra letter hey teaches you that it's only applying to a male, does not apply to a female. V'idach eved ha-eved lo darish. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, I don't hold that the extra letter hey teaches you anything over there. And therefore the bottom line is in this exercise of hermeneutics, as I said, the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is not based on whether or not you make the Gzeira Shava. They both hold of the Gzeira Shava. But the Tanakama sees from extra verbiage in the Pasuk that these 4 laws only apply to an Eved who is sold by Beis Din. They do not apply to an Eved who sells himself into slavery. Have a wonderful day, a good Shushan Purim, and a good Erev Shabbos. Rabbi Chanani ben Akasha Omer Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zachus Es Yisrael Leficha Chir B'Lam Torah U'Mitzvos.